Welcome to the Innovation in Higher Education podcast, where we share the diverse views and perspectives of experts in higher education, innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship from all around the world on topics related to the future of higher education and the future of work, in an engaging, fresh, friendly, and very human format. Let's get started. Welcome to a new episode of the Innovation in Higher Education podcast. My name is Viviana Rojas, and I am the director of Digital Mente. Of course, I will be your host for today. Today's topic is female leadership in academia, and we have, I think, who is one of the best guests we could have had for this topic. We are here with Karen Weber. Karen is a professor emerita of higher education at the University of Georgia in the US. She's also joining us from the US at the moment. And she's currently the president of the AIR, which is the Association of Institutional Research. She's also the principal investigator of a research grant of the U.S. National Science Foundation, which focuses on the transition from university to the labor market, especially for STEM students. So, hi, Karen. How are you? It's very nice to have you here.
Hello, Viviana. It's so nice to be with you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
The pleasure is mine. So we're going to talk about female leadership in academia, a topic that you know very well and that you for sure can give us a lot of insights from your own experience as a woman building up a career in academia, and just share some insights from your own very own perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for asking me to come and join you today. And it's been a great opportunity for me to reflect back and think about my career and some of my colleagues that I've gotten to know over the years. I think I have to start by, I think about my background, my experiences that started when I was younger, when I was a child or just moving up through high school and college. And I stand very much on the shoulders of women before me. And I'm very grateful for all of the colleagues and the friends that I've had over the years that have supported me. But I have to start, of course, with folks like my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother did not attend college, but she was an incredibly strong and smart woman. And my mother was a first-generation college student, lived in small town in Appalachia, parts of Tennessee. And so she was first generation, and she raised me and my brother and sister to all believe that education was incredibly important. And in particular, my mother was a very strong woman. I say that she was a feminist before her time. And she raised me and my sister and brother, but to all think that we could do whatever we wanted. But education was, of course, the key. So I look very much to my mother and to my grandmother and other women in my family who gave me the initial support. And then as I moved into my college and my work career, I'm grateful for all of the women and the men who supported me throughout my time. Of course, I've had great colleagues within my department, but I've also had really important mentors and colleagues in other departments outside of my own individual department, as well as across the country. And I'm grateful for the many colleagues that I've had over my 35 plus year career, excuse me, that have helped me. So in addition to my work career, I've had supports and mentors outside of work. And I think about folks like more famous women across the world, folks like anthropologist Margaret Mead or Condoleezza Rice or Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Those were women that really were ahead of their time. And so I've taken great admiration from them. I also think about some college presidents, women college presidents like Drew Faust at Harvard, Amy Gutman at the University of Pennsylvania. So I feel very lucky that I've had lots of women and good role models throughout my career.
Yes, that you just mentioned many important aspects of what I think are needed in order for more women to be in leadership positions, for more women to aspire for more. You mentioned role models, you mentioned support systems, of course. And I think that it is so important for, especially for women in a mostly male-led society, to have these examples to follow, and to have also these uh, I don't know if called to call them tools, or to have them resources, better, I think resources is a better way to describe them, that could help them as well to pave their own way. You know, for example, you mentioned that you build up your character because you were raised by strong women as well. You know, your mother, your grandma, that always empowered you. I can totally relate to this because it was the same in my case. You know, I grew up, but it's so funny for me how we can have similar experiences coming from different, some like so different places. You know, you come from the States, I come from Peru. Uh, the societies that we live in and that grew up in are different. The times, the generations as well are different. But I still can find these similarities. No, in my case, it was the same for me with my grandma especially, and my mom. You know, my family is a women-led family, so that's why I always grew up with the mentality that I could achieve anything I wanted, as well as you did too, like with the importance of education in my development. Like, so that's I had that chip implanted too. So I guess you had it too. So that's something that brings you forward. You know, when you know that you can achieve whatever you want, when you know that education is the most powerful tool to achieve all your dreams and goals, then it's kind of like it kind of happens by defect, I guess, when you believe in that, and you have that as a main value. And the same for your role models, right? Like, I think, especially if you come from a family that is non-academic or that is non-professional, or like from a not professional or high corporate background, it's very important to have access to people that you can look up to, and to see, like, and to ask them about their own experience, so that you can also tailor yours in a way that makes sense for you, of course. But it's important to have the backup of someone who already went through that way. And I think that's one of the main points for building more women leaders at the moment. Like to build these support systems, to build these available networks. What do you think about that?
Right. I do think so. And I think that having more women also allow us to help us shape some of the perceptions that are out there in our society broadly, but also within our higher education work environments. And with my background, part of my earlier background in my master's degree being in psychology and clinical psychology, I often lean back on my earlier work, my earlier knowledge on the ways that humans think and the way that we perceive others. And so having more women can also help us shape the way we think about women in higher education. And with my background in psychology, I still believe very strongly that we all perceive others based on very deeply embedded stereotypes, images, conscious and also very much unconscious attitudes and images that we have learned through our lives. And so those deeply embedded stereotypes and schemas related to gender affect the way that we perceive and expect others around us to behave. When we think about women, the way my generation of women was raised, and certainly my mother and grandmother and all generations prior, we believe that it was only appropriate or mostly appropriate for women to only do certain kinds of activities. And that was very much the case for my grandmother. But for my mother, she was ahead of her time, as
Mhm.
were many of these other women that we mentioned earlier, who said, I've got to get out there and do some things that are a little bit different. In my mother's case, it was because she was financially responsible for her parents. And so she was motivated to get out and do some perhaps non-traditionally female things. So each generation has helped us um, reshape some of these stereotypes and biases or ways that we think about women. So the more women that we have in our higher education environment, I think that always helps us um, have the likelihood of reshaping some of these attitudes and expectations about what's appropriate and or not appropriate.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially with what you said of the importance of women who are ahead of their times. Because right now, I mean, in 2023, feminism and female empowerment is a thing, it's a topic that has been broadly talked about. But before, it was like, this woman is a bit, like she responds too much, or she's a bit too stubborn, or she's a bit too bossy. We had all these biases and all these, beliefs. That were embedded in the society itself. I remember I like history a lot, and especially I'm right now very focused on the Victorian era. So I see a lot of videos of that, and there were even manuals for women on how to behave, that so that men like them. It's crazy. I read them and I'm like, I am between horrified and amused. It's so funny and it's so amusing, so entertaining to see how different and how crazy the thoughts were, and compare them to what happens now, and compare it to how I think, and to how women around me think, and to women around me can accomplish. So yeah, definitely times are changing. Times have changed already, and it's because of these women that were ahead of their time, that kind of dared to break the status quo of their times,
Yeah.
that we could actually move forward. It's a very interesting phenomena to follow. And like following up on your story, so you've talked about how, like, what were the support systems that allowed you to build a successful career and to build a leadership career as a woman. But during this time, did you find barriers? Did you have any experiences that you can share with us about difficult times, or like challenges that you had to go through when on your way on building up your career?
That's a great question. Uh, uh, Overall, I like to think that my life, my career has been generally very positive. But yes, have there been barriers? And I'd say yes, there have been a few experiences in my career that I remember, and that still they don't affect me. But I guess they continue to motivate me in my later career. So let's see, a couple experiences, a couple examples. Earlier in my work career, I worked in an office with about 6 professional staff members, and we were getting ready to go to a conference. And that was great and exciting. But our office didn't have lots of money, so my boss said, to save money, could you all women, could you share a room? And
Mhm.
so I said, okay, sure. As graduate students, that's what we had done. So I said, sure, no problem. But when I got to the conference, I then learned that the men in the office got their own separate room, but the women had to share. And I thought, not sure if that seemed quite right.
Yeah.
And it was all fine, but it's just wasn't quite equitable. Let's see, maybe another example is very soon after I had gotten my PhD, was feeling really happy and pleased to have finished my PhD, and I got my first full-time job after finishing my PhD. I probably hadn't been in that office, but maybe about 2 or 3 weeks. And I was talking with another employee in that office, and I said, I don't understand, whatever was the issue. I didn't understand. And she looked at me quite sternly. She was an older woman, and she said, well, you know why you got your job, don't you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you got your job only because you have blue eyes and blonde hair, and turned around and walked away. And to this day, I have never forgotten that comment because, of course, uh, I hope that wasn't the case. I don't think that was the case. Um, and and I was just so shocked that someone would say that. But what that comment has done for me, Viviana, is make me, I think, work even harder.
Made you
Because
stubborn, more stubborn. I was like, how
um,
dare you to say
yeah,
that?
and to show that I have the abilities, I have the knowledge and the intellect that come with having a PhD. And so while that was very hurtful at the time, I have made that one of my motivators that I think have kept me striving for many years to come. Maybe one last example. Even more recently, over the years, as I have continued my work career, and we go into meetings as a group of people, and before meetings get started, there's usually a few moments, 5 or 10 minutes before the meeting gets started, where you have some small talk, and you're just talking with your colleagues. And as I think back on most of those meetings, almost all of the chatter, the kind of the informal dialogue, is related to sports. Who won the latest sporting event last night? And all of that's really good. But in our society, at least in my US perspective, sports is a male dominated topic, and expected that men will be knowledgeable about sports. And that's fine. I enjoy sports, but not quite as much. But how would it feel? Think about how it would feel if I went into a meeting, mixed gender meeting, and I started asking how they felt about this particular flower that was blooming outside now, or ask if they thought about how this recipe would taste for tonight. And I don't think that those kinds of traditionally female topics would be received as well as our our topics that are more male oriented. So over the years, what I think I have done, and what I think a lot of women in professional offices do, is they learn how to adapt. So we learn how to talk about sports, or more often than not, we sit and listen, and we don't proactively engage in those sports. And that has an effect on how others perceive women in those meetings. If you're quiet and you just listen, then you're not seen as engaging as much. So I think over the years, as I reflect back on it, I've probably been more quiet in meetings, especially in that early banter, because my areas of interest might be somewhat different than some of the others in the meeting. And my life has been that in most of my working career, I have worked with many more men than I have women. That just has to do with my age and my time as a generation of women before. So again, I think I would be wrong to say that my career has been much more than everything positive. I am very blessed and happy for the good things that have happened in my career. But to say it's been perfect would also not be the case. There have certainly been times during my career where I have been doubted because of my looks, or doubted because I didn't engage in the traditional male banter.
Yes, and this makes me think, so the examples you just mentioned completely correlate with some of the topics we were mentioning before, right? Like the unconscious bias of even from women to women, from a woman to another woman to say this such I don't know, it's such an offensive thing that maybe she didn't even think it was offensive, but more rather like than logical, And this is, I think, this is the ill thing, like people assume that this is the logical way of how the world works, and or used to assume. Some of them still assume that. And as well, regarding the conversation topics, or this tells you a lot about who is the leading group in leadership positions, because always the conversation topics of the small talk will respond to the interest of the leading group. So this
Right.
tells you a lot about how much this is still like intrinsically like embedded in society, and how different how challenging or different or harder can it be for women to build up a leading career in a male-led society, which
Right.
still happens to me. I can also relate to that. But yeah, I think it also depends a lot on the personality of the woman, because that's, I mean, if you have this perfect ingredients of having been raised in a way that that you are as good as any person, regardless of gender, you can also put up your agenda and say, yeah, I don't care about sports. Well, why don't we talk? I will show you about that. I will teach you or talk to you about something that interests me, so you can talk about it now. Something like that, like to speak up. But as well, again, that wasn't so well seen before. Well, and
Mhm.
now it is more respected. So I think it's very good.
One other example, or I guess maybe a point to add, is that one of the barriers that I think women still today have is trying to find this balance, what we call work-life balance. And it's getting better for sure, but in my particular case, it affected kind of the end of my career. And so about 5 years ago, my mother had a stroke, and she was not doing well. She continued to go downhill. And although my other siblings are very involved, there's always been kind of the unwritten assumption that the women are the ones who take care of others. And so, because of the geographic proximity, I was the closest child to my parents. And because I was the female, it was more my responsibility to take care of my parents. And for the first couple of years of my mother's health issues, as she continued to go downhill, it became more difficult for me to mentally be able to focus on work and to focus on care. And that affected my health. At the same time, my husband had some cancer issues, and one night, I guess I had this epiphany moment, but I said to myself, if I were to die tomorrow, what would I have to show for my life? And what I came to realize was that while I'm so honored that my career has been pretty good, that I wasn't feeling really good about the care of my family. And so during COVID, I had the opportunity to really think about what I wanted to do. And so I decided to move into that emeritus position and stay on. I'm honored to have the emeritus title and to stay on as a part-time professor so that I can continue some of my work, but also have time for family. So I'm glad about that. I'm glad that I had that opportunity. But that's another example of where, in general, women don't have the luxuries of separating their home and their work, their home life from their work life. Care still goes to the women, and so it affected the kind of the way that I'm gradually moving out of the workforce.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I think it's the same situation for women who are mothers at the same time. You know, like I can put you my own example. I had to basically leave my career behind for 1.5 years, basically completely drop my career because I had a baby. And even though I have a very supportive boyfriend, at the beginning of the life of a baby, the care relies mainly on the mother, and this is, biologically speaking, is unavoidable. So that also makes you, in my case, it was kind of mixed feelings, because on one way it made me realize what is, as you mentioned, what is important in life, what is really important in life for me as a person, as a woman, as Viviana. You know, of course, I wouldn't in any case I would have wanted to leave my baby behind, and then years in the future, looking backwards and say, maybe have the guilt of because guilt is also a very strong factor for women, I would say, when you are not taking care of the ones you love, because it's also a natural instinct or something like that. I don't know how even to call it. But yeah, I didn't want to look back on my baby and his first years and realize, I wasn't so present because I focused more on my career, you know, because for me, in my scale of priorities, my baby came first of everything, you know, and yeah, so I definitely agree with you, and it's also a good reflection that I've heard it I've heard it more often in women than in men, to be honest. But then I've also heard some men at the end think about it, like at the end of my career, especially for top managers or men who got into top positions in companies, or I haven't heard much from academia, but because my network is from corporate, but I have sensed as well as a lot of regret on the time invested in the career when compared to work-life balance, because at the end you end up having the successful career and everything, but then you see that you lost and missed a lot of golden moments with your family and the ones you love.
Right.
So I guess that's all. The decision that you took, I think, is also a brave decision, but it also has to be taken into account in how women design their careers and the structure of how career advancement works. Because at the present moment, I think that still the workforce is not ready for women to be more integrated, because it doesn't integrate the needs of women, you know. And this is a huge other topic that we could talk about, maternity leave, and we could also go through, you know, like the menstrual cramps, because also men don't have menstrual cramps, you know, like, and for some women this is really
debilitating.
Like, you just, I have some women that have endometriosis, some friends that have endometriosis, and they just can't work when this happens every month, you know. So this is also another topic. Yeah,
definitely.
There's a lot to do, and I think that's also a huge barrier, you know, the how the system is structured at the moment, and the biological aspects of being a woman, you know, like, and there are some sacrifices that women will have to make, and some barriers that women will have to go through that men will never have to go through, all those sacrifices that men will never have to make, in a way.
Yep, I agree. Yep, yeah.
And you mentioned me in the backstage of the interview that you had some data about the barriers of women, because now, I mean, right now we have talked about your own experience, but there's data. We have a more broad view of how this is actually happening around the world. So maybe we can go around a bit
Sure.
around the
Sure.
data.
Yeah, I can't come. I'm not a good quantitative researcher or institutional researcher unless I have some data. Okay. Yeah. So so when we think about barriers, it's not just the little things, but those barriers cumulatively can add up and affect perceptions that lead to fewer women entering a particular career or even higher education, and it certainly affects salaries. So I'm not a good quantitative researcher or institutional researcher if I don't have some data. So I brought just a couple of pieces of information to talk about this a little bit more clearly. If we think about the general trends for the representation of women in higher education, both as students and as workers, there's some good news and there's some less than good news. The good news is that when we look at the last 40 or 50 or even 100 years, we do see more women entering higher education, both as students and as professional workers. That's really great. Today, women earn over 50% of the college degrees, both baccalaureate and now even into the graduate, master's, and doctoral fields. And we have over 60%, 59 to 60% of women who are working in higher education. So we have lots of women. That's really great. But we don't see that consistently across all disciplines. And that's especially true in science and engineering. We don't have as many women in science and engineering. And even at the doctoral level, where we have many women getting doctoral degrees in science and engineering, many of those women are not going into careers. So we have over 50% that are getting their doctoral degree in science and engineering, but only 24%, according to some data from the National Science Foundation, only 24% of those women are going into science and engineering careers. So there's something going on here. When we think about salaries, consistently, women are paid less.
Yes.
So if we look at the next slide, for those who are looking at this podcast, for those who can see these images, this was simply a screen print to show that I'm happy to say that over time, women's salaries in U.S. higher education is going up. When I started looking at some figures back in the 70s, 80s, and 1990s, on average across the country, women were earning about 70 to 80 to maybe 87 cents per man's dollar. But now over time, up into the 2020s, we see that women are in the 80s to 90s percent, 90 cents per man's dollar. That's great. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not, but we're getting there. So this slide is just to say that we are seeing some increases over time, and that's great. And if we move to the next slide, we can look even more specifically to some salary trends for women. This data comes from an association in the United States called CUPA HR, College and University Professional Association for Human Resources. So this is a group of colleagues led by Dr. Andy Brantley, and they are looking at salary and representation of individuals within the workforce of higher education in the US. And what this image, again, this is a screen print, and what this is simply showing is that the black line represents a man's $1. And here in the US, in addition to gender issues, we're also very interested in differences for race and ethnicity. So these different colored lines represent different races and ethnicities. But if we look generally, just to kind of give it a quick glance, the black line, the black horizontal line, represents men's $1, and all of the open circles are the salaries for women. And for professionals, so these are individuals who are directors, vice presidents, individuals who have a professional title. In almost every case, women are earning less than men. So women comprise about 60% of the administrators in U.S. higher education, but according to the CUBA HR workforce trends data, women are consistently paid less than men, and those trends are going or have worsened since 2017. For professionals, CUPA HR finds that women earn about 92 cents to the man's dollar. So I'm really happy that we're not back in the 90s or so when we were in the 80s, but we're still below men.
Okay.
And if we look at some of these other categories of women beyond professionals, so in the next slide or screen print, this shows the median pay for administrators. So these are even higher level individuals. So the professional might be directors and analysts kinds of groups. And I said it incorrectly on the first one. So administrators here would be those senior folks, the more senior individuals. And what's happening here as we move in higher education, as we move up to more senior level positions, we find fewer women. And so you can see that the gap between men and women, regardless of race or ethnicity, is growing larger. I think that has to do with the fact that we have fewer women in these senior level positions. So if we look at just generally the data for median pay for administrators, even though women comprise about 52% of the administrative employees, we're still earning less, on average about 94 cents to the man's dollar. And those gaps are even more distinct for women of color. And when we look at just college presidents, so the most senior level college presidents or rectors, doesn't show in this particular screen print, but on average, female college presidents earn about 92 cents to their male peers $1. For administrators, we still see the gaps.
Yeah, the gaps is consistent.
Right,
That's
exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's one last slide from this grouping for staff. So the one group of individuals here in the United States, we have a category called staff, which is generally those individuals who are doing clerical or maintenance or technical paraprofessional kind of roles. So those would be the individuals that are probably with the least level of they're the lower level on the scales of skills, and we see this is where we have many more women who are represented in our workforce who are in staff positions. But here again, we see that women are consistently paid less than men. And on this, if you look at the black line, you see that in every case, except for those that identify with two or more races, women are earning below men. So we have the largest number of women in the higher education workforce in the United States in this category, and they are consistently paid less than men. So
one question: what is what does two or more races mean?
So in the United States, we have individuals have the ability to identify with two or more races. So I might have, my father might be of one race or ethnicity, and my mother might
Okay,
be
I
another.
understand.
And so, yeah. So those are just some quick and easy images to show that. So one of the barriers is that women are not paid as well. Now, the one group that we haven't talked about yet are faculty. We call them, in the United States, we call faculty, what you might call academic professionals. But again, just like with other professionals who work in higher education, faculty women are consistently paid less than their male peers. And like with the staff members, we see many more women who are concentrated in the lower ranks or in part-time positions. So we have this kind of an inverted funnel, right, or a triangle, where we have many more women at the lower ranks and many fewer up at the top rank at the professor level. And I believe
Yes.
should be maybe one more slide. So this is, again, just a screen print, but from data from another group called AAUP, the American Association for University Professors. That group comes out with some salary information every year. And here you see salaries for academic professionals in 2021, 22. And in each category, you see that women are earning less than their male peers. So we have many more women at that assistant level professor. They're earning on average 91% to a man's dollar. But when we move up the ranks to professor, that top line, women professors are only earning about 87 cents to the man's dollar.
Okay.
So we have lots of work in ensuring that women faculty, academic professionals, are earning equitable salaries.
But we're getting there, no? Because when we saw the trend, like in a timeline, it's that the tendency is growing, and as well, I think this correlates logically with the fact that 40 years ago, education wasn't even allowed for in some regions and for some women, right? Same as basic rights such as voting, you know. So we are building up from scratch, basically. So I think it's kind of a logical that this is a logical situation that this comes in a curve like this. So maybe let's hope for in the next 5 years we get to close the gap finally.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that we are getting better. We are getting more women who are being voted to be approved as those higher ranked faculty. So we have more women. You know, when I started monitoring some of this information in the 1990s, you know, on average, we had about, across the US, we had about 20% of full professors were women. And now today, on average, we have about 30 to 35% of full professors who are women. So we are women are moving into higher ranked positions. And because we're monitoring it and because we're talking about it, salaries, of course, are getting more equitable. And that's only going to continue to move closer to equity if we continue having conversations and continuing to monitor this.
Not only having conversations, but also pushing from our side, I would say. I think it's not, at least in my experience or from my own perspective, is also a way of, like the way would also be to be not so passive, but more active players, you know, like to be activists about this. And actually this right now, what we're doing here, also, I hope it helps to raise awareness on that, and it's a way of being it's a way of activism towards this topic of
Right. Yeah.
gender
I think,
equality.
and I will say that this differs very much by discipline. So
Yes, yes,
in
definitely.
more traditionally female fields, salaries are more equitable, but in some of the science and engineering fields, particularly physics, some areas of agriculture, and computer science, we see that women are the least well represented, and
Yes,
they earn lesser salaries, or are not moving into the full professor ranks as much. So,
I agree.
so again, and thankfully in the United States, and I know in Europe and other places across the world, we are continuing to monitor salaries and representation, and so that will help a lot for sure.
Yes, you have one more slide here about
Okay, so I think this was just to kind of summarize. So when we look
okay.
at AAUP data, we see that the equity ratios across all of the different ranks are not completely equitable. Oh,
Yes.
and I guess the 2 points that women are very underrepresented in some elite universities, and those are the ones that typically pay the higher salaries. So, so I think we need to keep monitoring for women in those elite institutions as well. And then, it's important to remember that an individual's salary and level of benefits have a cumulative accrual over time. And so if women aren't earning those same salaries throughout their life, they don't have the ability to have larger savings, which will affect their ability to retire, and then their quality of life and their economic assets in retirement. So it's not just a 1 year kind of thing, but it's something that affects women throughout their life.
Well, we've been through two very, I would say, critical and important aspects. So one is your own experience on an individual level, and then the barriers from an individual level and a macro level as well. And taking all these 2 points together and looking up into the future, what would you say are like the solution pathways or the opportunities that you see for women leadership in academia, for increasing women leadership in academia?
Yeah, good question. And again, even though I get down on occasion about some of the things here and there that may not be 100% equitable, I think there are lots of opportunities for women, both in their continuing education as well as in their careers in higher education. And so I'm optimistic for the future. And I think we have to keep monitoring it, but we are seeing shifts in attitudes, and shifts in also the generations, your generation, Viviana, of partners. Husbands and fathers are supportive of their spouses who are going into further education and work. So I think we're seeing a shift in attitudes, as well as many opportunities. What are some of the opportunities? We have many in the United States, at least. I guess I can speak from those areas. We have career academies. We have career women in higher education kinds of opportunities for workers who are in their work environment. So, for example, at the University of Georgia, we have a women's professional academy in which women workers can apply to be considered for part of this academy. They go through it as a cohort, and they learn some skills and learn how they might continue to further their career. So in many colleges and universities for those workers, there are women's educational events or career kinds of academies that can be great. In professional societies, there might be awards and honors for women who are achieving in that field. And there are seminars. For example, in the Association for Institutional Research, there is a relatively new seminar called LEADS. And it's not just for women, it's for men as well. But there you can apply for this seminar, and it is designed to help create leadership skills for professionals in institutional research. Within the National Science Foundation, there are lots of awards and grants that are designed to help encourage women and individuals of underrepresented race and ethnicities. So we have something called the Early Career Award, and that is for supporting new individuals who are early in their career. And there's very much a special focus for some of these awards for women or for women of color. There are lots of other research grants and programs in which the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, other kind of agencies like this are putting forth money supporting programs for women in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, and other similar kinds of programs. So I think we have programs. So we have the support, I think, of our partners, our spouses that are helping change some of our work-life balance issues, which is certainly an issue for lots of women. We have educational opportunities and awards within our work environment, within our own individual universities, and we have professional associations that also have some of those career awards or career opportunities. So I think those are the three that come to mind right away. And I'm so honored to have been chosen for some leadership academies, also some leadership awards within my profession that have helped me to say, yeah, okay, I'm doing a pretty good job, and that they highlight me as a woman in some of those opportunities. So I think we have lots of things, and it just requires women to speak up. Cheryl Sanderson says to lean in. So we have to lean in, or we have to reach in and take some of those opportunities. And I will say that I think as I reflect back on my career, at least, and this is my particular style as well, is that it's finding a balance, not being too assertive or too pushy, but also not being too soft and not speaking up. So being able to find a balance, having a level of confidence to say, by golly, I know I'm good. I have some good skills and knowledge, and I have something to offer to this particular issue, and raising my hand and saying, yeah, I want to take advantage of that opportunity, and not being too hesitant and reticent and not speak up. So it's finding balance.
This brings me back to the topic of building confidence from scratch, right? And this has a lot to do with how you're raised and the education that you receive as a child and as a young woman. And then again, because and this differs from culture to culture and from country to country, I think it's especially in cultures that are male-led or that have where women are traditionally understood as the parts who have to stay home and raising the kids. There's definitely more work to do than in other societies where the gender equality gap is reduced in a way because it's also intrinsically understood as that. And I would add to that to solve this issue, because of course this issue will vary from culture to culture. To solve that, I would also add to what you said, to build bridges between cultures and backgrounds that are already a bit more advanced in the topic of gender equality, so that they can be role models for the others, because I think everything starts through education and through how you are raised since you are a small girl, right? And because then again, it's the most efficient way to do it as well, I would say, because then it's if you are raised with this belief that you are capable of doing everything, of accomplishing everything, then it's easier for you to not doubt about yourself than if you were raised with insecurities and thinking that you are from the other side, because then changing the mindset, changing the chip, is when you grow up is harder than so unlearning is harder than learning. So you follow my point.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. I do believe, I have to say, I agree with you so much on your notions of nature versus nurture. And of course, nature does give us our general abilities, knowledge, and intellect, and how we can manage based on our nature, what we're given biologically. But our society around us very much shapes
yes,
how we think and act.
100%.
Now today, social media certainly has an influence on how individuals perceive the world around them. And so I'm constantly today thinking about how social events and social media affect us.
True. Yeah, it can be then again, it's a tool such as AI right now. ChatGPT is also being
Yes,
super
yeah,
talked about. So some people are scared of it. Some people say it's bad. Some people say it's good. But I mean, in my opinion, it's a tool. So it really depends on the person how to use it. But then again, it depends on the culture of the society.
yeah.
Because that will shape how the tool is used. I think.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. A
Yeah.
colleague and I just submitted a short essay today. I just submitted
Uh-huh.
an essay today on Chat GPT and the
Uh-huh.
implications of artificial intelligence
Uh-huh.
in higher education, and in particular in IR. Fascinating,
Yes.
fascinating area. Yep. Absolutely.
I use it. I'm an avid user of ChatGPT actually because I create content. But for me, it's a blessing because it's like having a free assistant that makes no grammatical mistakes. It's super nice. I really like it. But it really depends on how you use it and how much how comfortable, how much prior knowledge do you have about the topic you're using it for. So because it can also I mean it's the human it's the human role to correct it if wrong, because it's not a perfect tool yet.
Right.
It's on
It's
the way.
certainly not. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I
So
think,
that's
yeah,
still a human skill
right.
to
I
find
think
the mistake.
there's some good and there's some bad with ChatGPT or any other chatbot kind of tool, because we'll have to think about issues like ethics and responsible use and data security. All of those issues will be really important. And I think in the classroom, our faculty members, our instructors are going to have to think about how can we integrate this tool into the learning process.
Yeah.
I think those are going to be some really interesting issues. And I hope that women will be part of solving some of those issues in the future.
Definitely. And we are drifting away of the topic, but I think it's important. I think it's a very entertaining topic to talk about. It's a very fascinating topic to talk about. But I
Yeah.
really like to close this small drift of topic. I would say that in my opinion, for higher education, ChatGPT is one of the best things that could happen for pushing up the transformation of higher education. Like this will force teachers, professors, academics to actually be more innovative. Because this brings an earthquake to how traditional education was established, to how traditional teaching was done. So now they are forced to innovate. So that's good.
Well, I think that's really an excellent statement, Viviana. And
Mhm.
I just listened to a podcast a few days, a week ago, from a scholar named Tom Davenport, and he said many things, but one of the comments that he said is that I think in the future, um, most everyone in our workforce is going to have to learn, in order to survive, everyone is going to have to learn how to work with
Yeah,
AI.
100%,
And
100%.
and yep, I agree. And I thought that was an interesting statement. Not that we're going to lose a lot of jobs,
Mhm.
but the only jobs we're going to lose are those people who don't learn how to work with AI. And so that means in higher education, faculty members, instructors are going to have to think about how they're going to incorporate this tool into the classroom and into how they teach and learn. So I
Mhm.
think that's a really good statement that you're on the right path with that one.
Yeah, now that you mention it, actually, the next episode of this podcast series in March is about the future of work, and just the next week, yeah, after this episode releases, the next episode is about the future of work, where I talked with women leaders of Deloitte's Institute of the Future of Work. And they're also doing many great things with higher education institutions for transforming them, so that they are able to provide students with the abilities that the workforce demands, that the
That's,
future workforce demands. So yeah, I would totally, if you're interested in the topic of the future of work, I would totally recommend you to check on that. And okay, coming back to women leadership in academia, I would also, so you mentioned 3 points that are opportunities, 3 or 4 points that are opportunities for women, for women to level up the leadership positions in academia, to close the gender gap that there still exists in there. But I would like to highlight as well the importance of role models and support networks, because I think this is also something that it's not taking so much into account yet to the level that it should be, because as I said, we need connections, we need to establish bridges between one and the other. And women, I think a very important aspect, not only for women but in general for a human being, is the sense of belonging. It's the sense that you belong to a group, it's the sense that you are supported by a group and that you're not alone. So psychology in the Maslow hierarchy pyramid, like the sense of belonging is one of the base needs of humans. And this is not an exception for women, of course, especially for women being still underrepresented in academia. It's very important to feel that they belong somewhere, in my opinion. So yeah, building these support networks and having mentors and role models to look up to, that are available, that are not only there but that are available to give advice or to give coaching in a way. It's also very important. So yeah,
I can't agree with you more.
Mhm.
And you said it all very well, very eloquently. But I do believe that mentors are so absolutely important, especially for young professionals.
Mhm.
And I like that I have had some mentors and good colleagues in my department, but I also value the fact that I've had some mentors and really good colleagues that I could go to that are outside of my department
Mhm.
and feel like I didn't have to be, quite on guard with those individuals who were outside of my department. And as I was going through promotion and tenure, to have, in particular, I will forever be indebted to one woman whom I've known for 30 years, but to know her and to be able to call her and say, Diane, what do you think about this or that? And for her to just give me her unbiased thoughts, gave me not only support, but also a confidence to make a decision that I felt comfortable with. And so having those mentors having those colleagues, very, very important for
Yes.
sure.
And in the case of academia, since it is a field that is still led by men in the upper positions, I would say that maybe finding female mentors or female role models will be more scarce. Maybe it was as well in your experience, because you also come from another generation where the gap was even wider. But now I think, so given this context, it is important to also have like male allies, so since a lot of the top positions are led by men, it's important that these people buy this idea of gender equality and that actually become allies. Okay, I'm a man, but this doesn't mean that I cannot be a feminist too, like, and this is extremely important for the advancement of the field, I would say, as well. It's not only a responsibility of women, but it's also a responsibility of men. So yeah.
Absolutely. And in my generation, you're right. I have worked with many more men than I have women. So I am honored that I have many men who I consider my mentors and good colleagues that I can go to as well. And so, of course, women or men, but there are certain things that I will trust with a woman as
yes,
well.
Of course.
Men, I think some of the best feminists in my years are fathers who have daughters, who have seen their daughters experience some issues that weren't quite right. And so I love to work with those fathers who have daughters who have really come to understand what feminism is all about.
Yeah, I agree. Same in my experience. Well, Karen, it has been great talking to you. I guess we'll have you again in the podcast, because you have so many some other interesting topics to talk about, especially regarding your latest research grant on this employability for STEM students. I'm really looking forward to get to know more of the results that you get. I guess we will definitely have you again. So I thank you for your time. And I don't know if you have any parting words to the audience. It can be about this topic, it can be about yourself, it can be about whatever you want. Feel free.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you. This has been a real pleasure and an honor. And I'm so glad that you're doing this because I think it's a great way to share with lots of people all over the world. So thanks for the opportunity. It has been great for me to have time to reflect back on my career and my opportunities as a woman. And again, I think my parting words are, I'm so glad that our world is every day becoming a bit more positive and a bit more welcoming to women in general. I'm glad that we've continued to make some increases in representation and in salaries, but the ways that we will continue to move forward is through continual monitoring and bringing in young women like you who have the confidence, the knowledge, the skills, and the opportunities to continue to move forward. So good luck to you and best to everyone. And I hope to see you in person someday as well.
Yes, I also hope to.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the end of the episode. But remember that this is a series of 4 episodes that we will have through March. So keep an eye on the Innovation in Higher Education podcast, because there are things that are coming that are very interesting and very nice. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Innovation in Higher Education podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter to not miss any episode. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok as @InnovationInHigherEd. Cheers!